All right, assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let's see about two things. Right, we're going to talk about two things really quickly about the structure, two ways to see the structure on a macro perspective and on a micro perspective. It's really simple, right? So I'm not going to draw line, but instead I'm going to just follow the arrow and it's going to be really simple. So there's two ways. I mean, there's a couple of ways to see the structure, but the two main ways are the macro versus the micro perspective, and we will discuss later about structure based on sweeps and closure, etc. You know what I'm saying? So let's just make things simple. The macro perspective, when you look at the structure, right, there are a couple of ways here, right? Really consider the overall point of view, right? You see, for example, in this leg here, right, price was coming up. We had a little bit of pullbacks, etc. See all this? Some people came with rules like if we see only less than two candles, two bearish candles, we don't consider it as a pullback. If there's more than two candles, we consider it as a pullback. I mean, a why? Because I mean, this particular rule here, for example, there's two candles, so it's not enough to consider it as a pullback, right? It only means that the higher time frame influence is higher here, right? For the higher time frame to produce a significant pullback. That's it, right? So for that reason, when you see this little pullback here, little bearish candles here, right, we can consider this overall as a channel, right? It's a tight channel. It's a really tight channel, and this is the higher time frame expanding, right? Extension, right? Pushing price higher. Then here, the higher time frame started to give a little more pressure, a little more power from the higher time frame, right? So here on the daily time frame, and we see here that the daily time frame started to create a more significant pullback, right? More significant pullback. So on a macro perspective, we have this low here, this higher high, higher low, right? And again here, right? There's one interesting thing to play with is the same way we use the rule of two bearish candles to define, I mean more than two bearish candles to define a pullback, right? We can use the distance, the measurement, right? So from this high here to this low, because we said that this was a more significant pullback on a macro perspective, right? Again, all of this is just a micro perspective, micro perspective. So on the macro perspective, we have this pullback here that is really significant. We can measure from this high here to this low. And if later we get the same size pullback or even greater pullback, we can then say that they're giving us another pullback, right? So for example, you see here, price pulls back here, comes higher, pullback, pullback, but is it a pullback or is it just a micro structure that we have here, right? There's more than two bearish candles, right? But again, remember I said that some people advise, right, to use some rules like two bearish candles, more than two bearish candles. I'm adding to this the measurement, right, the size, right? So if we have more than two bearish candles here, yes, maybe, but I mean not maybe, but there's actually three bearish candles, right? I mean the size is different. So from my perspective, on a macro structure perspective, I don't see this as a pullback, right? I see this as a single a leg, right? A single leg from this low, this higher low, to this higher high, right? Even this one here. All of this, I consider this as micro micro structure here, micro structure. All right, so from that for that reason, we have this here, pullback. We have a higher high, higher low, right? And then price comes here and starts to fail, right? They came back here into our most significant structure we had here. So now that we draw our macro structure, right, we we see that we have a single area, right? We have a single area. The pullback here forms our single area, right? So I consider the area from the high to the low, right? So I'm not paying attention to this. I mean, we all pay attention to everything, but in terms of, I mean, I'm not paying attention to this leg, bullish leg here. But in terms of areas of liquidity, right? For liquidation, later when they come back, they are liquidating, right? They came and they're consuming the areas, the structures on a macro perspective, even on a micro perspective, but let's just focus on the macro perspective. So we have here a single area on the daily time frame perspective using the macro structure perspective again, right? So this is really interesting to pay attention to because we understand now this single area could be sensitive, or we understand that single area because they are single, they could be weak, right? Now there are other elements to pay attention to if we had a momentum as price was pushing higher and leaving this area, right? If we have momentum, it gives a little more strength to this, right? So why? I mean, let's just look at the weekly time frame. And so when looking at the weekly time frame, we all on an overall perspective, we see that we have price just going higher, right? There's no like significant pullbacks, etc. On a macro perspective, right? On a macro perspective, price is really bullish. The only most significant pullback that we had is this one here, right? So eventually, maybe we can count this one here, right? From this, let me just zoom in a little bit. So, okay, we see that we had a quite a significant retracement here, right? It was a quite significant retracement in terms of the size of the retracement. So we could, yes, we could consider this in terms of macro perspective as a push higher and then finally a pullback. So we can say that until this point here, until this area, what can we do, right? Nothing in terms of macro perspective. So what are we left with? We are left with the micro perspective, right? We need to pay attention to these little formations here, right? To these little formations, these little pullback, two bearish candles here, like two bearish candles here, one bearish candle here. We can draw all this structure if we pay attention. You see it is two bearish candles here, one bearish candle, uh, one bearish candle here. We discuss about this later here, this bearish candle, about this bearish candle, about this bearish candle. We discuss about it later in our like structure section, right? Chapter, whatever. I should write a book, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, so we had the two bearish candles here, one bearish candle, one bearish candle, one bearish candle, right? Um, so we need to consider this microstructure, and if we pay attention using this microstructure, and again with the concept of liquidations and single areas, we realize that here we have a single area, right? And we have another single area just above. When they came above, they closed above, right? They closed above, they left this. We'll talk about this later. They closed above and they given us a double area, what we can call a double area, right? So they came, so now the pullback we saw, the significant pullback we saw on the daily time frame, and this macro perspective bearish pullback that we're currently seeing on the weekly time frame is coming into some micro structure forming a double area, which is significant, which entails bullishness from for that sole reason, right? A double area is this really sensitive structural point, right? For price to maybe start unfold bullish from there, right? So uh, again, macro perspective, micro perspective, less than 10-minute videos. It's okay. So macro perspective, we don't have quite a macro perspective to play the goal of the macro perspective is to arrive at some uh, liquidation areas, right? Single area, double area. We're going to talk about this later. Um, Same thing with the micro perspective, right? If we don't have a macro perspective, we use the micro perspective, and with the micro perspective, we scan for single, double areas. These type of things, right? There are other type of structures, but the goal of the structure is to arrive at a point where we start seeing liquidations.